officer and co-founder of the Secular Student Society here at UIC, and I will be the moderator for tonight's discussion. When Crew and our secular student group were trying to figure out the topic for tonight's discussion, we wanted more than anything for the topic to resonate with students practically. The tried and true formal debates on topics like does God exist are good and important to have, and I expect they will play a somewhat important role tonight in tonight's discussion. But what really does that stuff boil down to? When it's all said and done and we go home and we reflect on events like these, usually I'm inclined to think that we fall back not on logical syllogisms or various arguments, but what the answers to the big questions imply for the values that we hold dear, for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for our communities. The question, what makes life meaningful, can at first seem trivially philosophical and impractical, but perhaps at second glance, the question is an intensely practical challenge. Where does meaning in life come from, and why do so many of us need it to get by? Is it cosmically located, or is it something that each of us creates? Tonight is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on what grounds our daily motivations and the motivations of so many different peoples and creeds around us here at UIC. In that respect, the discussion tonight is more important than merely educational. It's important to bring people and ideas together that would have otherwise been alienated. Tonight, I hope that the similarities as well as differences between the two viewpoints will be highlighted and serve as inspirational for us to learn and grow more together. Tonight, we have our two speakers. They will give two 20-minute presentations on their answer to the question, what makes life meaningful? This will be followed by a Q&A between the speakers. Finally, after that, we'll open up the floor for the remaining time for questions from the audience, and we'll conclude. I'd like to thank Crew for all their hard work in helping with the organization process. Thank you very much, Daniela, for all the emails that we exchanged. Before we start, we ask that you silence your mobile devices and refrain from commenting on the discussion until the audience question and answer period comes around. All right, so with that, I will invite Crew to announce Sanjay.
Alright, thank you guys. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me? No? Okay. Alright, thank you guys for being here tonight. Crew is a Christian organization here on campus, and we focus on creating a real relationship with God, a real relationship with each other, and having a real impact on our campus. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers, and then we can begin. So Sanjay is an assistant professor of theology at Unity Bible Institute, and he received a PhD in philosophy of religion and theology from Claremont Graduate University. Croft is a humanist, activist, and public speaker. He's a graduate of the University of Cambridge and Harvard. He's currently studying for his doctorate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's a leader in training in the ethical culture movement, which is a national movement of humanist congregations. So please welcome up our first speaker.
Well, I would also like to thank our two groups, Crew and the Secular Student Society, for your invitation to be here. Tonight's topic, again, is what makes life meaningful? Christianity and humanism. Well, let me give some definitions. By Christianity, I'm sure many of us have a good sense for what's meant, but let me tell you what I mean. I mean that there is a maximally great God, who is the cause and purposer of the world and everything in it, and the source of meaning and value. Now, that is perhaps just theism. Christian theism would also say that this maximally great God revealed himself in Jesus Christ, a second divine person who comes from the bosom of his divine Father, bearing in himself the fullness of indivisible deity. He came to compassionately seek and save the lost by giving himself for the world which God loves. And in triumphing over the enemies of humanity, namely sin and death, he promised another divine helper, the Holy Spirit, who proceeds from God to nourish and guide those who God is saving, and continue his mission of reconciliation and restoration in the world. Christians, from the apostles to our day, profess that humans find ultimate meaning coming to know who they really are and what their purpose is, and indeed eternal life in union with the true man, Jesus Christ. Well, now what about humanism? I'm sure that Mr. Croft can tell us a bit better than I what humanism is, but as I see it, humanism is broadly conceived as an optimistic perspective on human rational and moral capacities, and a hopefulness about the utility of human achievements. As such, humanism broadly conceived really isn't contradictory to Christian theology. It's not even contrary to Christian theology. In fact, there are and always have been Christian humanists. I think what we have in mind tonight, of course, is secular humanism, which is a functionally atheistic perspective on human rational and moral capacities, and a hopefulness about the utility of human achievements. So how does one justify secular humanism? There are, of course, a variety of ways to be secular. You might be an atheist. You might be an agnostic. You might be a heartless capitalist. You might be a naive progressive. You might be a Platonist. So long as the question of God is more or less inconsequential to you, you're a secularist. Typically, however, philosophical naturalism is the conceptual basis for Western secularism. Secular humanism rests upon philosophical naturalism. So, if we're going to get down to brass tacks in this discussion, I think we need to examine and contrast Christian theism with naturalism. Now, what is philosophical naturalism? Briefly, and I think roughly defined, naturalism is the idea that nature, not God, is the ultimate being. Anything which exists is natural. There is nothing prior to nature, nothing that is supernatural, nothing beyond space, time, matter, and energy. Everything which exists is to be studied and explained with the procedures, concepts, and terms of the hard sciences. Now, the problem, as I see it, for a secular account of meaning and purpose is that philosophical naturalism is inconsistent with secular humanism. Naturalism undermines humanism's confidence in the power of human reason. Its affirmations concerning the intrinsic moral worth of all persons and its hope to improve things in the future through free, rational action. Now, why do I say this? Let me give 3 reasons. First, naturalism, again, the philosophical basis for secular humanism, cannot account for the existence and order of nature, and therefore fails to provide an ultimate account of meaning and purpose on its own terms. Let's begin by considering a basic philosophical intuition behind all scientific inquiry. Namely, that anything which exists has an explanation of its existence. The sciences begin with the assumption that the objects which they study are explicable. Otherwise, we'd have no reason to study them. Inquiry into the existence and behavior of insects gave rise to entomology, for example. Questions about plants gave rise to botany. Questions about animals gave rise to zoology, and so on. The philosophical assumption that for anything there is an explanation of its existence serves us well. Nothing is simply and brutally inexplicable. And is it not obvious that the physical universe, that is, nature, exists? It might not have, but it does. And since it does, we can sensibly ask, what explains the existence of the universe? Surely we can coherently imagine the quarks, those little bits of matter which currently compose the universe, having not existed at all. There's no reason why they must exist. Now, we can't use the resources of nature, that is, we can't make reference to space-time, matter, and energy, in order to explain space-time, matter, and energy. We want an account of these things which might not have existed. And the best account is that nature, which again might have failed to exist, is explained by something beyond nature which could not have failed to exist. In other words, the existence of the universe either has a supernatural explanation or its existence is literally inexplicable. And the latter option flies in the face of scientific inquiry. Since naturalism cannot countenance a supernatural explanation for anything, naturalism is anti-scientific, at least on this question. We should add that as 20th century cosmology has demonstrated, the universe, in fact, began to exist. Most educated people prior to the 1920s believed that the universe was eternal. The fact that the universe is expanding, first captured in the Friedmann-Lemaitre model, and later supported by Edwin Hubble's discovery that light from the most distant stars Mars is shifted to the red end of the spectrum, overturned the old, static, eternal view of the universe. Nature, shockingly, has an age, just over 13 billion years, and consequently requires not just an explanation, but a causal explanation. Big bangs require big bangers, as nothing, let alone a universe, can spring into existence literally uncaused. What is more, there's an important point we must make about the cause of the universe. Causes are either mechanical or personal. Purely mechanical causes are non-intentional, no one is intending to do them, and they require, of course, scientific explanations. Whereas personal causes are intentional and require non-scientific explanations. When we ask Tommy, why did you punch Jimmy? We're inquiring about Tommy's personal motivations, not conducting a scientific investigation. Now, any mechanical cause of the universe would be either temporally finite or temporally infinite. That is, the cause would occur in a limited duration, or it would occur eternally. If it were a temporally finite cause, then we need to ask what caused it to occur, since no mechanical cause can cause itself. Yet, if it were temporally infinite, then the universe would be eternal, since once a cause is given, the effect is given. But the universe, again, is not eternal. Therefore, nature has a personal cause. Someone, not something, freely determined that the universe would begin to exist some finite time ago. We also now know that a small number of fundamental laws of physics govern the operations of nature. And embedded in the mathematical expressions of these laws are certain constants and quantities which might have been different. For example, the gravitational constant, the entropy level, which is a boundary condition of the universe, the weak and strong forces, and the ratio between the masses of the proton and the electron. As it turns out, if they had been different, any of these constants had been otherwise, in most cases, the world would not be life-permitting. It wouldn't even be life-producing, as naturalists think, but rather it would be life-prohibiting. In other words, if the constants embedded within the laws of physics were slightly different, we humans wouldn't exist. For this reason, physicists now speak of the fine-tuning of the universe. Now, the probability that fine-tuning for life is a result of chance is vanishingly small, since not only must each individual physical constant fall within a life-permitting range, but the entire set of constants must fall within the life-permitting range. Consequently, naturalists will often conjecture that our universe is just one among a potentially or actually infinite set of universes beyond our own, which were brought into existence by some other universe-producing mechanism. But there's no reason to think that the universe-producing mechanism is itself self-explanatory. What would be its explanation? In any case, theism, which provides an explanation of all nature, no matter how far we extend it, affords a vastly more elegant and simple account of the fine-tuning of the universe. Positing an infinite number of unseen universes to explain the fine-tuning in this universe is extreme overkill, and frankly, just an exercise in myth-making. So, unfortunately, naturalism cannot account for the existence and order of nature itself, and lacks the internal resources to do so. So secular humanism, which typically assumes naturalism, therefore really has no hope of providing an account of ultimate meaning. A better explanation of nature is that it has an external cause and purposer. Theism is far more intellectually satisfying than naturalism, which, among other things, makes life meaningful. Second, naturalism cannot account for the reality of moral values and duties, which are a genuine feature of our world. Failing to account for this reality undermines the secular value of intrinsic human worth. Again, according to naturalism, everything is reducible to nature. Moral facts, however, don't appear to have anything to do with the physical world. They're not composed of atoms, aren't in space and time, aren't governed by laws of physics, and are distinct from physical events. Moral facts, like it's wrong to murder, express objective moral values. That is, they're true whether you like them or not, and impress upon us moral duties. One ought not to murder. However, these values and duties, as I said, do not arise from the natural world. Notice that I'm not asking whether one can be good without acknowledging God. I assume that all humans, being made in God's image, have great moral capacities. The question is whether the naturalist can account for the reality of objective values and duties. The most common naturalistic explanation for moral facts is that evolution has selected certain species-promoting behaviors, which we now consider to be moral behaviors. Any behavior that harms the species, like practicing cannibalism, has already been selected out. So we humans, as products of evolution, view kindness, which benefits the species, as a virtue, and cruelty, which harms the species, as a vice. Unfortunately, this won't cut it. Evolution might have gone very differently. Suppose that the males of our species, because of environmental pressures, had evolved to be so violent that they were unable to socially cooperate with any other humans, and that females had to form protective groups. But every so often, the men would go into heat and collectively attack the strong female groups for mating purposes. Under normal circumstances, the males would not act against the females in unison. They'd rather fight one another to the death to protect their own territory. But in mating season, their instincts would cause them to engage in forced sex. Evolution might have gone this way, such that rape would not be considered morally prohibited, but morally necessary. So on evolution, there's really no reason to think that rape is objectively morally wrong. Likewise, evolution cannot impress upon us objective moral duties. Suppose again that evolution had built in us a visceral attraction to the color green and disgust at the color white. We could tell an evolutionary story that might support this. In time, we would come to see wearing green clothes as moral behavior, and wearing white clothes or displaying white anyway as immoral behavior. But one who preferred white in that world, contrary to most others of the species, would have no real duty to avoid white and wear green, although others would consider him a pervert. Likewise, on naturalism, the psychopath has no reason to prefer kindness to cruelty. If we humans are merely products of nature, we bear no intrinsic value. Killing a man for his money would be no more immoral than a shark eating a fish. But killing a man for his money is morally wrong, whereas a shark eating a fish is not, because humans do have intrinsic moral worth, contrary to the appeals of naturalism. Since any version of secular humanism which assumes naturalism is unable to ground objective moral values and duties, secular humanism is morally meaningless. They can affirm compassion as they should, but they don't have a basis for it. And third, naturalism, contrary to the basic values of secular humanism, cannot account for rationality, which is supposed to be the prime resource for human flourishing, or free will, which is necessary for the moral life and for realizing rational and beneficial outcomes for humanity. If my mental life, my beliefs, items of knowledge, desires, intentions, deliberations, and so on, are reducible to nature, then they are merely mysterious epiphenomena of the physical processes of my brain. According to naturalism, blind evolutionary forces have selected the most beneficial behaviors for our species. The beliefs which we find ourselves with are mere after effects. There would be no reason on this view to think of my beliefs, to think that my beliefs, which are the result of blind forces, are truth-directed, since the purpose of human life, if we could speak of purposes in evolutionary terms, is to survive, not to apprehend the truth of things. In addition, there would be no reason to think that I ever act freely. On naturalism, humans are nothing more than physical beings, meat machines, which act according to their brain states, being governed by external laws of biology, chemistry, and physics. But none of us is in direct control of our brain states, let alone the scientific laws which govern nature. It follows that none of us can directly affect our brains, or the it follows that none of us, can directly affect our brains or the mentality which emerges from them. Brains, on naturalism, cause minds. But minds have no direct effect on brains or bodies. So my deliberations and choices are in no way free. I don't make choices. My brain processes simply proceed, and I behave accordingly. But if I were not free, then we cannot live meaningful lives in which we autonomously seek to realize goodness. There would be no hope for the future. Every event would already be determined as the physical processes of nature unfold, and we would have no ability to make any difference at all. Contrary to these entailments of naturalism, I'm quite sure that there are objective moral facts, and that I often act freely, that many of my beliefs are in fact true. So if naturalism contradicts any of these things, so much the worse for naturalism, and so much the worse for secular humanism. Things like reason, compassion, and hope certainly give life meaning. I think Mr. Croft and I will agree on that. But secular humanism cannot affirm these things. It cannot account for these things. In fact, naturalists ought to, against sanity, reject them. For this reason, true meaning is found in something beyond nature, a maximally great God, the cause and purpose of the world and everything in it, and the source of meaning and value, who has revealed himself in Jesus Christ. I'm happy to tell you that he is my Savior. He gave himself for me, though I hated him. His boundless compassion prompts me to treat others with compassion and recognize intrinsic value in goodness. God's great wisdom in ordering the world and producing humankind in his image gives us confidence in the power of human reason and agency, and we find our purpose and meaning within this order. Entering into a life of meaning begins with receiving Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Thank you very much.
I'm not going to, at this point, address anything that Professor Mochen has said. I'm just going to present my case, and then we can discuss it a little bit later. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be a teacher. I used to love watching movies about great teachers. Dead Poets Society is one of my favorite movies, and I also kind of wanted to put a splash of School of Rock in there as well. That was the sort of teacher that I wanted to be. I used to imagine myself as an inspirational teacher, like the Robin Williams character in Dead Poets Society. I saw myself striding the halls of the school, whispering Carpe Diem into the ears of my students, and watching as they stood on tables, inspired and delighted by my lessons. So no surprise that after I finished high school, I applied to study education at Cambridge, and then after graduating, joined the Teach First program, which is basically Teach for America, but back in England, where I'm from. The Teach First training program was grueling, an intensive 6 weeks of practical and theoretical training designed to prepare idealistic young graduates like me to teach in some of the toughest schools in Britain. But for me, it was a blast. I loved it, and I sailed through all the exercises with ease. I even taught a workshop of my own during the summer, the first time in the history of the program that a trainee had ever taught a workshop to the other students. The program ended with a week of teaching in an actual school, and that was supposed to be the sort of reality check moment, when we trainees were to realize how difficult teaching really was. But for me, it was one of the best weeks of my life. I spent the week joking with students and laughing and learning with them in class, while constructing what I thought were ingenious lessons filled with fun and excitement. By the end of my 5 days there, I had children following me around the school, sort of like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, and I even had an affectionate nickname. They called me Obi-Wan Kenobi, on account, I think, of my crazy hair that I had at the time, and my big beard that I had, and my general zany nature. I think it was an affectionate nickname. I hope so. In my last class of the week, I stood at the front of the room and wished my students farewell, ending my time with them as their teacher with a benediction of sorts. May the force be with you. And they all rose as one and gave me a standing ovation. I thought I had found my calling, what I was meant to do in my life. Not long afterwards, I was sent to my actual school where I would be teaching. Public school, what would you call that? Yeah, a public school, you call that public school. In Feltham, in West London. Now, Feltham is one of the most economically and socially challenged parts of the United Kingdom, known primarily for the Felton Young Offenders Institution and once notoriously being rated the incest capital of Europe. And here I was in for a rude awakening. To say that I struggled as a teacher is an understatement. I was disastrous. I had absolutely no authority in the classroom. You know those teachers who, when children see them come into a room, everything gets quiet immediately? Do you ever have teachers like that yourself? I was the opposite. When children saw me come into the classroom, they would start to misbehave. I'm not kidding, that really happened. During my lessons, they used to cut the legs off the chairs with hacksaw blades, and they'd use the severed legs to drill holes in the wall, all while I was trying to teach them, totally oblivious of what was going on. They would greet me with the most outrageous homophobic slurs and taunts, and they never seemed to learn a single thing. And I hated it. I hated going to school. I became seriously depressed, and my health began to suffer. I was angry and unkind to my friends and family. I remember I used to sit on the platform at the train station wishing, praying that the train would be late so that I would miss a lesson. And one day I found myself wondering if it would hurt all that much if instead of stepping onto the train, I stepped in front of it. This profession, this calling that I'd been working toward for so long, turned out to be the very worst experience of my life. And I think much of what was so difficult about my failure as a high school teacher is that I thought I had found the meaning of my life. I thought I knew what I was supposed to be doing on this earth, and over the course of a few months, my hopes for myself and my future fell to pieces. I lost my meaning. A sense that our lives are meaningful is very, very important. People spend years trying to find a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. Many of us, perhaps all of us, want our lives to mean something. And one of the most dangerous feelings that a person can have is that their choices, their life, is meaningless. That they don't have a reason to live. In fact, I would go far to say that the great threat to human welfare is not adversity or challenge, but meaninglessness. The feeling that nothing really matters. Research confirms this. Those that can articulate a clear purpose to their life, a strong sense of meaning, have greater mental and physical well-being and tend to live longer than people who cannot. When we feel we have a meaning in life, a raison d'être, we can meet even the greatest challenges with a smile. If we succumb to purposelessness, the smallest waves are enough to capsize our mental ship. Nietzsche observed that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And I think he's right. I think it's fair to say that many people, even people who are comfortable in terms of their material wealth, are suffering from a lack of meaning, a lack of a why. Felix Adler, who was the guy who founded the first ethical society, like the ethical society I work with in St. Louis, in the 19th century, said 140 years ago, there is a great and crying evil in modern society. It is want of purpose. Now, we don't need to be quite as dramatic as him. He was a big drama queen. To recognize that many people clearly do feel a want of purpose or meaning in their lives. Books like Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life fly off the shelves, offering people the chance to find purpose in God or religion. The book The Purpose of Your Life by Carol Adrian promises to unlock your life's purpose through the untapped power of synchronicity, whatever that is. Eckhart Tolle, a spiritual guru, has made a whole career from helping people find their meaning. But what is meaning in life, and how do we find it? I want to present just a couple of ways that this has traditionally been looked at by philosophers. One of them presented today. Some think of meaning as a sort of destiny, as if there's a purpose for you in the universe, and your job is to discover what that is. Some of what we just heard had that character. Under this interpretation, our path is set, and there is a road we should be travelling, if only we can find it. Rick Warren takes this view. In The Purpose-Driven Life, he writes, "Before you were born, God planned this moment in your life. It is no accident that you're holding this book. God longs for you to discover the life he created you to live, here on earth and forever in eternity." What he doesn't write, but what I feel like he also wants to say is, "And he longed for you to buy my book." According to Warren, the meaning of your life is something created for you by God, and it's yours to discover, like a fossil buried deep beneath the earth. If you dig long enough, pulling up the ground and brushing away the dirt, you'll find what you were meant to do in life. But whatever it is was shaped long before you ever came on this earth. You don't create your meaning, you only discover it. And once found, you have to follow where the path leads. Taking the opposite view, some hold that meaning in life is not discovered, but created. Under this view, there's no destiny, no fate, no life pathway set down before you were born for us to fall into. Rather, our lives are ours to fashion as we will, unfettered by any grand design. This view was most famously espoused by the existentialist philosophers who originated the phrase, "existence precedes essence." They meant by this the fact that a person exists comes before any given idea of what that person should be, their essence, and that therefore people are free entirely to create their essence for themselves. We are what we create ourselves to be. Freedom in this view is ultimate, both intoxicating and terrifying. For with total freedom comes enormous responsibility. And this is why the existentialists, despite their mantra of freedom, were often a gloomy lot. Also, a lot of them were French, which doesn't help. So meaning discovered, meaning created. Which one is correct? Ultimately, I myself find neither of those accounts fully persuasive. The first, meaning and purpose as destiny, something created before we are born and that we simply discover, seems to me obviously wrong. It doesn't fit the reality of our psychological lives. I don't believe, first, that there's any evidence that we were created at all, except, of course, by our parents. And I see absolutely no indication that every human being comes into this world with a singular purpose that they must uncover. And I certainly understand the romance in that notion. There's something about the idea that I have a perfect path laid out for me, a fossilized arrow pointing in my life's direction, waiting under the ground, if only I can find it. It makes my sense of adventure tingle. It seems like I'm just about to fall through the wardrobe into Narnia, or receive a letter saying that I've been admitted to Hogwarts. But despite the undeniable attraction of that idea, I don't believe we simply discover meaning. Life's too complicated and messy for there to be a single reason that any person exists in the world, and too random for any notion of fate to hold sway. It seems to me too fantastically self-centered to imagine that the creator of the universe has gift-wrapped a meaning for us all, going to all that trouble to craft our personal meaning, only to bury it again, with some of us never finding it before we die. Yet at the same time, the notion that we are entirely free to create our own purpose in life seems to me to ignore important constraints on our freedom. The fact is, we don't enter this world a blank slate. We are, for starters, all human beings. We are a particular type of evolved animal, with particular predilections towards certain desires and ways of living, which limit the range of things which we're likely to give a sense of purpose and meaning to us. We're all born into a social context, which starts to shape how we think and act, way before we have any say in the matter. By the time we are fully conscious agents making our own decisions, to the extent that we even do that, we have been molded by our genes, by our family, we're not entirely free simply to invent a purpose for our own lives. Indeed, if we were free to do so, wouldn't the search for meaning in life be easy? Wouldn't we just decide what our meaning was going to be and just go on our way? Why would it be so difficult for people to have a sense of meaning if it were just something we create? So if neither of these common views is entirely correct, then what's the answer? What is the meaning of life? I was hoping some of you would have the answer. Yes! I was waiting for someone to say 42, and it worked. Fellow nerds unite. I love you. I cannot give you the answer to that question. That's not why I'm here today. But I can offer some guidance as to how I think about making my own life meaningful, which is the question we are asked to explore today. What makes life meaningful? First, consider the possibility that we may not have one meaning or purpose in life. This whole way of looking at things is misleading. Instead, we may have many sources of meaning, and they may change and shift throughout our lifespan. Viktor Frankl, in his legendary book Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, "The meaning of life differs from person to person, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at any given moment." Freeing ourselves from the notion that we have to discover or create a single guiding meaning for our lives enables us to find meaning in many of the different things that we do. Our work may provide us with a sense of meaning, or our family may, the exercise of our talents, or the development of new ones. We don't need a singular, unchanging meaning of our lives for life to be meaningful. And that word, meaningful, the word in the question that brings us here today, what makes life meaningful, leads to my second suggestion. Experiment with thinking about meaning as an adverb rather than as a noun. Perhaps meaning is not something you discover or create, because it's not a thing at all, but rather an orientation toward life, a way of being. Rather than asking, have I found the meaning of my life? Perhaps we should ask, am I living meaningfully? Is what I'm doing right now meaningful to me? Or am I being hemmed in by habit, held back by fear, or distracted by something shiny and fun? Usually a video game, in my case. If we take the time to consider how meaningful our choices are to us, we may generate a greater sense of meaning in our lives, and therefore make our lives meaningful. Finally, I'm convinced that meaning is to be found in relationship with other people. Researchers have consistently found that those who report the greatest sense of meaning in their lives feel that they are part of something bigger than themselves. And this may be one reason why members of traditional religions often report a greater sense of meaning than non-religious people. Their religion provides a grand narrative that they can be a part of. They feel part of something that extends beyond them. But humanists and the non-religious need not be left out here. Even if we reject the narratives of traditional faiths, we're a part of many things bigger than ourselves, which are worth devoting our lives to. We're each of us enmeshed in relationships with countless of other people, and that web of relationships is bigger than any one individual in it. We're part of a community, and ultimately we're part of the great story of humankind. What we do will ripple throughout the ages in the care we offer to others, the children that we raise or teach, the values that we promote and how we act. Our lives touch other lives. We are part of something bigger than ourselves. For my own part, I didn't find a sense of deep meaning in high school teaching or in academia, where I headed next. Instead, I found meaning, one of my meanings at least, working at a place which allows me to explore the biggest questions in life, questions like this: with a community of friends and colleagues who seek the best in themselves and in each other. I found my meaning in my work at the Ethical Society of St. Louis. And my work with the Ethical Society, including doing talks like this for people like you, feels meaningful. I feel that when I'm here, I'm living into my best self. My actions reflect my highest values. I'm using my skills in a useful way. I'm part of something bigger than me. And what I do makes a difference. And that, I think, makes my life meaningful. I don't think we need anything more than that. So whether or not my presentation today helps you find a sense of meaning in your life, I want to thank you for helping me find a sense of meaning in mine. Genuinely, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have a 5-minute intermission, very short. I'm going to set everything up, and then we're going to start again with the question and answer between our two speakers. Thank you.